So in previous class, we discussed about two different types of exceptions, checked and unchecked exceptions. And what is the checked exceptions are compile time exceptions and unchecked exceptions are runtime exceptions. Now we'll try to understand what are the different examples that we have for the checked exceptions. Okay, checked exceptions are coming during the compile time. So how it will occur basically when you use the free-defined library. So Java free-defined library, when you use, you will get the checked exceptions. Best example is using the file operators, or sorry, file operations, or you're using the like loading the class not found exception, IO exception, file not found exceptions. These are the checked exceptions. When you use the Java free-defined library, it based upon the statement that you are writing, it will recommend, boss, you are writing this code. Based upon the code that you have written, it may give the exception. So that is giving a kind of a warning. So that time you have to handle the exceptions. We have two different ways to handle the checked and unchecked exceptions. One is the try catch block and the second one is the throws keyword. So now I wanted to show you is one scenario for a checked exceptions, how to handle the checked exceptions. Okay, here I am writing one method, public void of read file. For example, I'm writing a method read file, and in this file, in this code, what I'm trying to write here is I have file input output stream, file input output stream FIS. This is object equals to new file input output stream, and where you have to write the file details and you have to close it. And when you do this, it is telling that boss, you have used the free-defined library, that is Java free-defined library. When you use Java free-defined library, this is C, file input output stream dot class file. So this was present in the java.io package. So they have written on 1994 and they have updated something on 2020. Okay, so this is the free-defined class dot class file, and which we are using to read the file. So when you're using the free-defined library, based upon the statement, what it is telling is, boss, you have written this one, but there is a chance. So what is the exception that we have discussed? Recoverable condition that occur during compile time or runtime, that is called exception. That's what we have defined. In this case, what will happen is, what it is telling is, boss, you have used the free-defined library, but there may be a chance of no file, or there will be chance of invalid file that will give the exception. Because of that, the entire flow will be terminated. Here, if you see, the syntax which I have written is correct, but I haven't provided file name and I'm trying to perform some operation. I'm not feeding any file name here, right? So that is suggesting me, boss, there will be a chance of getting the exception. So you can handle by throws that exception. Here, if you see, even I have not added that file name, but syntax is not giving any mistakes. When I try to perform any operation with FAS, it cannot be because I am not giving, it is null. So you cannot do any operations. That's why it will tell you that there will be a chance of getting the file not found exception. You have to handle it based upon the code that you are writing, that will recommend some kind of exceptions that you have to handle it. So one approach is this. Now what I'm doing is I'm not throwing the exception. Still I wanted to perform some operation. So I don't want it to throw the exception. What is the different way that we have? As we discussed, basically try catch block. So now it is error is gone. What we have understood is you can handle the checked or unchecked exception in two different ways. One is by using the try catch block. One is by using the throws keyword. So the same thing, the error is not coming up now. Earlier also it is not coming up. The reason, because the way how you are handling is not a matter. So whether you are handling the exception or not, that is a matter. Clear. So it is try and catch block and checked and unchecked exceptions. Now, what we'll try to see, what is finally block? What is finally and when to use finally block? So this is one of the block or predefined library that we will use in exception handling. Finally is what will happen is you are performing some operations no matter whether exception occurred or not occurred. Even exception occurred also it has to be done execute, or even there is no exception also it has to be execute. So we have to keep that code inside the finally block. So when there is an exception that will occur or not occur. See, for example, try. You are writing some code in the try. If there is an exception, after that exception, whatever the content that you are writing, even if you are writing in the try, that will not execute, the flow will be terminated. Catch is execute only when there is an exception. It will come and it will execute the content. When it will execute, only exception. Catch will catch the exception. When there is an exception only, it will comes to the catch block and the exception will catch that exception and it will print the exception trace. If you want, you will get the more detail about exception, why you got the exception, on which line you got the exception, or which method you got the exception, and which class you got the exception. So that details you will get it. But I wanted to execute something no matter there is an exception or there is no exception. Then we have to keep that code inside the finally block. Okay, so this is finally block. So we'll see whether this finally block is executing or not. Even there is exception place or no exception, we'll see whether that is executed or not. So now what I'm trying to show you is object dot read file. And you click here and you can see hello, I will be execute every time. So what we have to understand from finally block is finally will execute whether exception take place or not. So this is all the keywords which are related to exception handling. So try block, try user to, we have to keep the code which is like we feel that may give the error, that code we will keep inside the try block, and catch will catch the exception. Here if you write the statements that you can write it, and finally block executes whether exception take place or not, right? So now we'll try to discuss something. So hierarchies, exception hierarchies. What is exception hierarchies? Can we write in multiple catch blocks, and can we write only finally block? Those are the some important points that we'll try to discuss. So can we write only try back without catch block? So these are the important points. Okay. First we'll try to understand. We can write a multiple catch blocks. Important points these are. Okay. I will tell you how to write multiple catch blocks. We can write catch multiple times. Okay, we can write a catch multiple times, and we cannot write only try block. Okay, it is important point. Third important point, when you wanted to write both catch and finally, that is possible. So we can write catch, and finally we can write catch and finally for same. You can write catch and finally for a same try block. So I have written try and catch. Can we write multiple finally? We cannot write the multiple. We cannot write the multiple finally blocks. We cannot write the multiple finally blocks. Can we write the try and finally without having the catch? Yes, that is possible. We can write only try and catch blocks. Okay, sorry, try and finally blocks. You don't need to write the catch also, but only try you cannot write it, but try with finally also possible. Okay, try with finally also possible. Okay, so here if you see there is a try block and there is a finally block, so this is accepting, right? So it is telling that this is the case, it will allow, or it has to be do with the catch block. I will tell you why. So I will explain this scenario. Basically here you are writing something like int a equals to 10 by 0. Here you don't need to throw the exception. So here very important point is, okay, this is applicable for only runtime exceptions. Very important point it is. So when there is a runtime exception, you can write the try and finally block. When there is compile time or checked exceptions, then what you have to do, you cannot skip the catch block. Catch block is very important when it is the compile time exception. How we can skip? Is there any way to skip? Yes, we can skip, but when you throws the exception. When it throws the exception, you can skip when you throws the exception. Okay, so you can skip when you throws the exception, right? So this is some different points. So now we will try to see, can we write the multiple catch blocks? I'm trying to write multiple catch blocks, and when to write multiple catch, how to write the multiple catch blocks. First scenario we'll try to cover. One catch block and another one catch block. So right now I have written multiple catch blocks. Then it is giving the exception. It is giving the error, compile time error. It's saying that, boss, you have 2 catch blocks and second catch block will not reach. I will tell you why. Basically, you have added the 2 catch blocks. Here you have catching the same exception. Here also you are catching the exception. Here also you are catching the exception. So that is not possible. So this exception, whatever the exception that you have, right, that has to be modified. Here I am writing arithmetic exception A. Here I am writing the exception. I will tell you why we are writing the multiple catch blocks and what is the advantage of that catch block, right? So now what it is telling basically, first catch, as we know what catch will do, first we'll try to understand. Catch will catch the exception. Here, if you see, I am writing the two statements here. Hello, first catch. And the second one is hello, second catch. And you run this file and you can see what will happen. First catch will execute it. The reason because here, whatever the exception is giving, that is more relevant to the first catch block. Not more, it is relevant and it is same as the first catch block. So the line of code, it is giving the exception that is more relevant to the first one, then it is executing that catch. This catch is catching because this code is giving the arithmetic exception. In case this code is giving the string s equals to hello and your s dot caret of, and you're trying to get the 10th. Now you see it is coming to the second catch block because it is not giving the arithmetic exception. It is something different exception that you don't know. In this case, if you are more specific in what kind of exception that is throwing, you can catch that specific exception. If you are not aware of that, this is generic. So this will consider all kind of exception. Okay, so that is how we can add it. Now, very important point, can we add the arithmetic exception later? And first, can I add the exception? Very, very important, right? So now I'm doing it. Is this possible? It is not at all possible because arithmetic exception or IO exception, file not found exceptions, these all are the subclasses. Exception is the superclass. This is the higher class for all the classes, predefined classes. So always it has to be lost. Always it has to be lost. First priority will goes to the exception classes, subclasses. So these are the subclasses. So this will be the first one, and the last and highest hierarchy will be goes to exception. Every time you have to follow this thing. Actually, what it is saying is subclass or subtype of the exception you have to catch first, then superclass, that is nothing but exception that you have to catch last. So you can write multiple ones. So now what kind of exception it is giving? Basically it is giving the arithmetic in array index outbound exception. So I can add one more catch block. So it is now what will happen if I'm adding string inbound outbound exception. Okay, if I'm adding string inbound outbound exception, it will execute this catch block because that code whatever I have written, that will give the this exception. Okay, so it will come to the second catch. Okay, the reason because it is more relevant to the that X blocks, right? So that catch block. So first point what we discussed, that is clear. Now the second point is, can we write only try block? I have written only try block and it is giving me error saying that boss, you cannot write only try block. And coming back to the third one, can we write a catch and finally blocks for the same try? Yes, it is possible. You can write the multiple catch blocks, and finally block. This block will execute. So there is exception that is occurring, but still I wanted to print something. I wanted to execute something. Then finally block I'm writing, no matter what exception is throwing, no matter whether exception is throwing or not, this content will be executed. No matter how many catch blocks that you are writing, finally block will execute. Whether the statements are executing properly, there is an issue, no matter, but finally block will execute by default. Okay, can we write only try block with a finally for a checked exceptions? Checked exceptions, when you write it, like as I told, IO exception, file not found exception, class not found exception, means when you use any of the Java free defined library, whatever the exceptions that you are getting, those are checked exceptions. When you write or when you try to handle the checked exception by using the try catch, we can handle the exception in two different ways. One is using the throws keyword, one is using the try catch block. When you use the try catch block, and that is a checked exception, you cannot skip the catch. Catch is mandatory for handling the checked exceptions. So you can add the catch and you can write the finally. But for runtime exceptions, it is not mandatory to keep the catch block. You can directly write the try and finally block. So no matter whether you're writing the catch block or not for runtime exceptions, you can directly write into the try and finally blocks. Okay.